Hello and welcome to this video on the foundation program. My name's Cher. I am a junior doctor, I think. I don't know. I haven't really started yet. I'm going to be starting work in August and I'm going to be doing an academic foundation job. I'm super excited to share with you some tips that I found really useful when I was applying for the foundation program and also the academic foundation program specifically. And the reason I wanted to make this video is because when I was applying last year, I was kind of looking for this sort of advice on YouTube and I didn't really find it, and there was just like this one series I remember of like Ali Abdal's videos, which were obviously amazing, but I think I've watched them about 10 times already, so I thought, why not share with you what I found really useful, because there have been some really amazing, kind, generous people that have given me so much information that hopefully can be super useful to you as well. So we're going to start off by talking about all the different types of foundation program, because there are like 4 now, and I'm going to give you some advice for the standard foundation program, because there's a bit of an overlap in terms of how to choose your deaneries and things like that with the academic foundation program. So let's get into it. So there are 4 types of foundation program now. So there's the standard one, the academic foundation program, there's the foundation priority program, and the psychiatry foundation the Psychiatry Foundation Fellowship. So just some facts to start off with. If you're in a UK medical school, you'll get an invitation to join this thing called Oriel, which is like the platform where we do all of our applications. And this is not the last time you're going to hear the name Oriel, because it's going to come back to haunt us later. So it's your medical school that's responsible for giving you this email invitation, so keep an eye on your university email, sort of like September time. I remember I got mine on the 23rd of September, if that's useful to anyone. So as soon as you get this email, you want to register, you want to get it done and dusted out of the way so you don't need to worry about it and you're not that person that misses the deadline. Then once you register on Oriel, the application window is pretty small, so it's only about 2 weeks, and it's kind of end of October to beginning of November is that sort of time. So it's a really good idea to have thought about where you want to put as your preferences and what kind of things you're applying for well in advance, because that window is very short. Now, unless you're super organized in life and you know exactly where you want to go, the decision for where you want to spend the next 2 years of your life can be really daunting, and I know I found it very stressful. So I would really recommend thinking about a month or 2 in advance, and this might seem like a really long amount of time, but trust me, when you put your preferences down, no matter how long you've thought about it, you're going to second guess yourself. So I've got some specific practical advice on how to choose your deanery coming up later, so you can go to this timestamp. Hopefully future me has put it in. So with the standard foundation program, unlike the academic foundation program, you have to rank all the deaneries, whereas with the academic foundation program, you only apply to 2 places. Now, this might sound really silly and you're like, why are you telling me this? I'm obviously going to be fine, but trust me, it's happened to the best of us. So on Oriel, there are 2 columns, okay? There's like a preferences column and a non-preferenced column, and they're like these tiles with the name of the deanery on that you can drag and drop and put in whatever order you want. Now, you can drag and drop them on either side, either column, but the only time they get acknowledged as like you preferencing them is when you drag them from one column to the other. So when you put them from the no preference column into the preference column. And again, you're like, literally, why are you telling me this? This is so obvious. What do you think I am? But again, it's happened to people where they just drag and drop it in the no preference column and they don't put it over to the other side, and then Oriel doesn't know where you want to go, and oh my god, you do not want to be in that situation. So drag it to the other side. So one last thing for Oriel, save, save, save. The biggest tip. You do not want to be in that position where you've uploaded everything, you've put in all your details, and then you didn't save it. You don't need to be as extra as me, where like you save and then you log out and then you come back in again just to see if it's saved. That's a bit extreme. But save, save, save. It will save you a lot of stress. Okay, so with the standard foundation program, you can change your preferences until February, which is really cool. Did I just call Oriel cool? Oh my god. Okay, so when you submit your preferences in October, November time, they are your preferences and you can't change anything else about your application. Like you can't upload another degree, certificate or anything like that. But you can change your preferences for the standard foundation program. Again, I'm re-emphasizing this is just the standard foundation program and not the academic or the foundation priority or the other ones. And this is a really good thing, because the preferences that you put for yourself in October and November time, you know, you might be in a very different position in life by the time it comes to February, you might find that you don't want to go to that place, or you might find that you're actually really interested in a particular specialty that they don't offer in that deanery, and therefore you want to go somewhere else. And so it's a really beneficial thing to have that flexibility. And the fact that the standard foundation program has this flexibility versus the academic and the other ones is a key point that I'll come on to in my academic foundation program video, where I talk about the pros and cons. So with the standard foundation program, so hard to say. With the standard foundation program, you rank just your deaneries first, and then once you get allocated to a deanery, then you rank the jobs within that deanery. Another thing to think about is the fact that you can link applications in the standard foundation program. So that's two people who want to be allocated to the same deanery. So usually it's like a partner or a best friend. They can choose to tie their applications together, and then they get allocated to the same place. Now, there are a couple of things to think about with this, and a couple of rules to this linking process. So the first rule is that both applicants have to have written each other's name, obviously, but they also have to have written the exact same preferences. So even if one is a little bit out of sync, it will not link your applications. The second thing is, unfortunately, you can't change your preferences all the way up to February, like with an unlinked foundation program. So once you put your preferences down in October and November, those are your final preferences and you cannot change them. The third thing is that the link is severed. That's what they call it. The link is severed, which is a very dramatic way of saying the applications are no longer linked. So the link is severed if someone accepts an academic foundation program, and that's what it says on the website. Also think that if someone accepts a foundation priority program or any of the others, it also gets severed, but I am not 100% sure on that. I would recommend you double check that. And the fourth thing is that the allocation happens on the basis of the lower ranked score. So out of those two people, the person who's got the lowest score, and I'll come on to talking about what that score is made up of, allocation happens on the basis of that person's score. That can lead to some very difficult conversations, but in essence, that is what a linked application means. Now, a couple of points to consider if you're thinking about linking your application is that not all deaneries are created equal, and you're going to hear me say this phrase a lot because it's very true. You know, some deaneries are really small geographically and some deaneries are massive, and so a key thing to think about is that deaneries vary on the basis of how they process these linked applications. So some of them will allocate you just to the same deanery, and then they'll say, go on, make your own way. And some of them will link you all the way down to the same trust. So you'll be working in, hopefully, a closer geographical area. So if you're applying to a really large deanery, that's definitely something to think about. So let's talk about scoring FP applications. So the foundation program score is made up of a total of 100 points, out of which 50 is for the situational judgment test, and 50 is for what's called an educational performance measure, or EPM. So I'll just quickly talk about the SJT first before we delve into the EPM. So the SJT is going to be an online exam for you this year, which is great because I remember having to hunt around for like HB pencils and like shading in the little boxes, and oh my god. So it's great that it's online for you. So it's going to be held in these Pearson VUE test centres across the world. So great news if you're applying from abroad, because these test centres are all over the place. So the UKFPO, which is like the organisation that oversees all the foundation programme, have said that you're going to apply in November time for this exam, and then the exam will happen in December or January. You can sort of choose a date and time that suits you, which is really good. Now, the actual content of the situational judgment test, it's not anything to do with actual clinical conditions, it's not to do with any specific knowledge about any diseases, it's more things to do with how the ward works, things like patient safety, who's in charge, navigating tricky situations with like difficult colleagues, how to work in a team, supporting colleagues, you get the idea. And again, another quick point about the SJT, and people are going to think that I really hate this exam, and that's not the case. I just need to give you fair warning that, oh, there's a little fly near the camera. Hello, little fly. Sorry, I have to give you a little bit of warning that a lot of people have found that the SJT can be a little bit luck-based. Now, there is definitely benefit to preparing for it, and I think it's a bit out of the scope of this video, but I can share the things that I did to prepare for it as well, if that's useful. There is definitely a bit of a luck element involved with it. So that's just something to bear in mind when we're thinking about applying for the standard foundation program, or if you're aiming to go to, you know, a really competitive deanery. So the other 50 points, which is the educational performance measure, or EPM, they are made up of your medical school decile. So 43 of those 50 points comes from your medical school decile. So that is sort of your ranking in your year group. If you're in the top 10% of your year, that's the first decile, you get 43 points. If you're in the second decile or the top 20%, you get 42 points, and so on and so forth. It goes down like that. And the other 7 points come from what's known as additional achievements. So that is if you've got any publications, so you can get up to 2 points for PubMed ID papers, and the other 5 points you can get for additional degrees. So that's like if you did an intercalation, if you did a master's, or if you've got a PhD, you know, if you're on that level. So you get up to 5 points depending on degree type and also what class you graduated with. So just a quick word of advice, if you know you've got an extra degree, you know, you're not going to randomly acquire one between now and applying, depending on when you're watching this video. And so it's a really good idea to go get your degree certificate. I mean, not right now, finish the video and then go find it, keep it in a safe place. Tell yourself where that safe place is in a reminder for October, so you're not like me and you lose track of your safe place because it's way too safe. Make sure you know where it is before October, because you do not want to be in that situation where you forget where it is, or you lose it, or you can't get to it in time, and then you have to order a replacement and pay an obscene amount of money for it to come really quickly. But just a quick point that you can order a replacement degree certificate if you can't find it or you can't get to it in time, and you should probably allow like 3 to 4 weeks for that to come, and you will have to pay a small fee depending on your university. So like with all job applications, you're going to need a referee. So it's a really good idea to keep in touch with your personal tutor. Now I know for a lot of people, your personal tutor is kind of like this mythical creature that you see like once a year, or you email once a year, or for some people they haven't even heard from you in like 3 years. But do not feel bad for emailing them and getting in touch come application time, because they are fully aware that this is kind of part of their job role. So they know that when Oriel time comes around, their inbox is going to be flooded with emails from people asking for references, so it's okay. If, however, you're not very comfortable with your personal tutor, you can ask someone like an intercalation supervisor. Essentially, this referee has to have known you in a professional capacity for at least 6 months. So foundation program allocations happen in March, so that's when you find out about your deanery, and then you get ranked again within that deanery based on that same score of 100 points. And then in April time is when you find out what job you get allocated based on the rankings that you give between March and April. There's also something called a reserve list, which is kind of like a waiting list. So if you don't get allocated to a deanery the first time around, then based on whatever jobs are left over, you can get allocated to one of the remaining jobs, kind of just to mop them up. And some people actually find that they get to go to really competitive deaneries as a result of this. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how I chose my deaneries. And the reason why I feel like I'm in a good position to talk about this is because I was in a situation where I didn't really have a base in the UK, so I can kind of go wherever I wanted. So I was basically researching about every single deanery in the UK, and so that's a lot of information to go through. So how do you distill it down, and how do you think about where you want to spend the next 2 years of your life? So there were 3 main things that I thought about with this. So the first thing was geography, like where in the country would I want to live? What would I want to be nearby to? Things like that. The second thing was rotation. So were there any particular jobs or rotations that I was really, really interested in having, and were there some that I really, really didn't want? And then the third thing was competition. So how competitive it would be to get into a deanery, and then once I'm in the deanery, what my rough rank would be within that, which would then dictate sort of what my chances of getting my ideal job would be. So the first thing that I did to begin with was I looked at competition ratios and distribution of scores within the deanery. So Messley has very kindly put together this resource where all of these deanery distribution scores are on one page, so you can just search for the deanery that you want and you can find it there. Just in case it isn't the most up to date, you can also find this information on the deanery website if you go there specifically. And basically what this graph is it shows you the cutoff score for that year to get into the deanery, and then it also shows you what the highest score was and where the range was in between. So you can kind of estimate what kind of score you would need to get to be in the middle of the deanery, to be above average, to be at the top of the deanery, wherever it is that you're aiming to be. And the competition ratios are also available on Messley, and I've linked all these things in the description below so you can find them really easily. And the competition ratio is basically this table which shows you how many people applied for each spot. So is it like a 3:1 ratio, or is it a 1:1 ratio? And so of course the deaneries which have a competition ratio of less than 1 are less competitive, and therefore you're more likely to get into them. And then it goes up all the way to, I think usually London is the most competitive, and that goes up to like 3.5 sometimes. So all these links that I'm mentioning are in the description below in case you're wondering how you're going to find these things, so do not worry, I got you covered. So you might be wondering, how do I know what score I'm going to get? Because you're not going to know your SJT score until you get allocated to a deanery, which is great. And your medical schools don't really release the decile until just before the application window, so like October-ish time. So how are you going to know this information months in advance? Well, there is a way you can estimate it, and this is what I did, which I found to be really, really beneficial. So our medical school had given us a formula for how they calculate our deciles, and unfortunately the way medical schools calculate these deciles varies completely, so there isn't really a standard way. But you can contact your medical school and find out the way they do it if they haven't already told you. And so I already had my marks from my previous years, which is what they were using to calculate it. And so I could kind of plug in my own numbers and get a rough decile. And my ultimate decile was different to that, but it was a very good baseline. So you know at least roughly where you are in the 10 deciles that there are. And so from doing that, I got a rough measure of my EPM. So I had, you know, my publications, and my additional degree, and so I knew my EPM score out of 50. And then for the SJT, what I did was I took the national average, which is 40 out of 50, and I used that as kind of a baseline to see if I do slap bang average, what deaneries can I get into and where can I be placed in these deaneries. Again, like I said, the SJT is a bit luck based, so you have to account for the fact that you could be plus minus any degree of that average. But then once I had chosen my deaneries, it was a good indicator for what kind of score I need to get in the SJT to be able to get into those deaneries, and therefore gave me something to aim towards. So once I had looked into how competitive deaneries were and what the distribution of scores were, I had a look at job combinations. So I went to the deanery websites and I downloaded the spreadsheet for the deaneries that I'm interested in. So some deaneries have it in a lovely spreadsheet, which makes this job very, very easy. Some of them have it in a PDF. I'm looking at you, North, Central and East. But basically what you want to do is you want to download this table of all of the different job combinations that they have on offer. Now, what I did was I kind of used a traffic light system. So I filtered by things like location, the particular jobs I wanted in F1 and F2, and then I came up with these perfect job combinations for myself. That's the perfect job location, the perfect job combinations all throughout, the perfect jobs that I would really, really, really want. I made them green, and I was quite picky with the jobs that I wanted, and I know that some people may not be that fussed about what rotations they get, but I was really specific that I really, really wanted a couple of special ones, and that's why the number of green for me was quite small, to be honest. And then I went through and I filtered for the rotations I really, really didn't want and the locations I really, really didn't want to be in, and then I made them red, and then all the rest I made yellow. And so that gave me like a very good visual representation of what the proportion of my perfect jobs for that deanery are. But then I kind of went one step further, and what I did was I did a calculation of the total number of green jobs or perfect jobs for me on top of the total number of jobs in that deanery, and that gave me like an estimate of just the proportion of jobs that I found perfect in that deanery. So eliminating everything like rankings and things like that, how many jobs in this deanery am I actually interested in? And this is quite a useful thing because some deaneries, like I said, are really small, so they might only have like 100, 150 jobs, and some of them are really massive and they have like 400 jobs. I don't know if this is accurate, to be fair, that's an estimate. But, you know, I might have 3 jobs that I really like in the deanery with 150 jobs, and I might have 3 jobs that I like in the deanery with 400 jobs, but actually my chances of getting my perfect job in that small deanery, if you eliminate everything like competition ratio and rankings, is higher. So I'm more likely to put that one first if all the other factors align. So another thing when you're thinking about what jobs and rotations you want is to look at the job descriptions. Now this can be kind of a hard document to find, but it should be on all deanery websites where they give you a breakdown of what you would do on that job. And so it will tell you things like what's a typical week in that job look like, what kind of patients would you be looking after when you're on call, when you're on nights, and just the way not all deaneries are created equal, not all job combinations are created equal. And so 2 jobs, both in general surgery, for example, might have really, really different job descriptions, and therefore what you're doing on a day-to-day basis can actually vary quite a lot. So it's a really good idea to read this document beforehand. So for example, I remember I was looking at an obs and gynae job, and it looked really interesting to me, but then when I went to the job description, it told me that I would be doing general surgical on calls and I would be solely based in gynae oncology. And so for me, that kind of swayed me away from that job, just solely having looked at this document. So there's a lot to think about here, right? There's the job combination, there's what type of hospital is it in, DGH or tertiary centre. So just a quick overview, district general hospitals or DGHs are thought to be a really good option for foundation training because people say that they give you a lot more responsibility, you're handling patients yourself a lot more, versus when you're in a tertiary centre when there are a lot of high-flying consultants around, and therefore you kind of get left with a lot more of the administrative jobs, and therefore you don't take on as much responsibility, people say. Like I said, I haven't actually worked yet, so I can't give you my experience from that, but that's sort of the general debate as to which one to go for. Tertiary centres tend to be in sort of big cities where there's lots of cool research and teaching and lots of that sort of stuff happening, and district general hospitals tend to be in more rural areas. But again, it's just something to think about when you're making this decision. So apart from things like job combination and where the deanery is, I was also really interested in finding out about what the lifestyle in that place would be like. My time outside of work is very precious to me, and so I think it's super important to have considered what your life would be like outside of work in that area. There are a couple of different websites and apps that I use to help me with this. The first one, of course, being Rightmove. So I hopped onto Rightmove and I kind of trawled through the different accommodation that was on offer in those places. I looked at things like rent prices, like just the kind of space and builds that I would be able to find in those areas. And so through looking at these flats and these houses, it sort of started to build like this image of what my life could be like and where I could be living. And you know, you play it through your head, like you come home from work and you sit down on the sofa, and yeah, anyway. So then another app or website that I used was Google Maps. So I used Google Maps for two things. The first thing was to look through my commute. So I wanted to look at if I was living in this particular area and I wanted to work in this hospital, then would I be able to walk? Would I be able to take public transport? How long would the commute be on public transport? Is that something that I would want to do? And so that led me to start thinking about, you know, how long am I comfortable commuting every morning? How far away from work do I want to live? The other thing that I used Google Maps for, apart from looking at my commute, was looking at things around the area. So I kind of trawled these articles and blogs and had a look at cute coffee shops in the area, or how far away the supermarket was, how far away the gym was, things like that. And then I used Google Maps alongside these articles and blogs to just investigate them further. And again, this is just to kind of build an idea of what life outside work could be like, what kind of things would I want to be doing when I come home from work, how would I spend my weekends in this place, and would I be happy living in this area? And then the last two websites that I used were Messly and Junior Reviews, and they both have things like ratings and reviews for different hospitals in the deaneries, and so they're really useful, especially if you've never been on placement in these areas or you don't know anyone that's ever worked in these places, to get a feel for what the vibe of the hospital is like, if there's any specific advice people have about doing on calls in that area. And it just gives you a bit more information about the actual hospitals that you'd be working in, and therefore can help you to choose which ones might be better for you. Now, I know you might be thinking to yourself, why are you going into this in so much detail? Why are you like planning your life around this job that you don't already have, and thinking that you're going to be living in this deanery when you don't even know your SJT score, you don't even know if you're going to get in? And my answer to that is there is a lot with this application process that you cannot control, as with life. But there are some things that you can control. And this reminds me of a really great quote from Jim Rohn that I love. And it's, if you don't design your own life plan, chances are you'll fall into someone else's. And guess what they have planned for you? Not much. And I think that's something that I like to live by a lot, which is plan, 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 and then plan some more. Because I really don't think you can ever be too prepared. And so yes, there is a lot you can't control. You can't control what colour the sky is today and therefore what SJT score you're going to get. You can't control how well everyone else in your cohort does and therefore what your decile is. But there are some things you can control. You can apply smartly. You can utilise all this information that is out there to help you make the best decision for yourself, your professional life, your personal life. And so that's why I did all of this stuff. So I hope that was a useful overview of the foundation program. If you found this video useful, please let me know. Write in the comments below if there's a tip that you found to be super useful that you think you're going to use. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the academic foundation program in a lot more detail, and I'm going to delve into the things that I did to help me get my first choice job offers. So if you want to find out more about that, please click on that video. Thank you so much for listening.